It is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025, and California Governor Gavin Newsom coming out today begging for a bailout, for a $2.8 billion bailout for his state's Medicaid program. California, what do you know? Out of money. Trump saying, don't ask the federal government. You chose to give illegal migrants free health care. You sow the wind, now reap the whirlwind, Mr. Newsom. We're going to show you. Also, today is the worst day of the year, April 15th, tax day. Well, our president has something to say about this. And are we about to learn that big Doge discovery finally? That's what we're hearing. And apparently, it's going to be big. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel. And consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. So in 2022, Gavin Newsom came out in front of cameras, in front of the world, beaming with excitement, proudly endorsing and celebrating being the first U.S. state to provide free universal health care to illegal migrants, jumping on that left-wing lunacy of the time. Think back to 2021 and 22, the heyday of the Biden administration. They were in the middle of raiding President Trump's homes, charging him with over 80 criminal felonies, forcing Americans to stay in their houses. Liberal governors at the time were on these power trips. Which governor could go the furthest on flexing their gubernatorial executive power, issuing stay-at-home orders, California closing beaches, public parks, keeping kids out of school, and all the rest? Well, during that time, Gavin Newsom's uber left-wing legislature came up with what they called the California Blueprint, something the governor was overly giddy to endorse. Watch him here making the announcement back in 2022, celebrating free universal health care for illegal migrants, covered by you, the taxpayer. Roll the tape.
California is poised to be, if this proposal is supported, the first state in the country to achieve universal access to health coverage. So what does that mean? It means full scope Medi-Cal, including long-term care, IHSS, behavioral health to all low-income Californians, regardless of immigration status, regardless of their age, regardless of their immigration status. Full implementation will initiate January 2024.
Well, what do you know? 3 years later, almost to the day, Gavin Newsom coming out again. This time, though, not so giddy. This time, hat in hand, first last week saying he's going to need $3.4 billion in our money to cover the shortfall in California's Medicaid program, which he got. He obtained a loan of $3.4 billion last week. Then get this, yesterday, coming out again saying, oh, wait, we actually need more money. We miscalculated. We need another $2.4 billion because we're still short. Only this time, nobody wants to lend him the money. Watch.
Governor Gavin Newsom says the state short on funds for its Medicaid program known as Medi-Cal. The state expanded the program to cover undocumented immigrants. The governor asked lawmakers to approve another $2.8 billion in loans on top of a $3.4 billion loan issued last week. So California now making up a $6.2 billion shortfall in Medi-Cal funds. The money meant to keep the program properly funded through June.
The realities are the realities. You have to balance budgets. We balance our budget. Revenue is holding up. I don't see anything significant along the lines of what some have asserted. But I do see the need to make adjustments and changes broadly in the Medicaid system.
Meantime, Republicans blaming Democrats for creating financial insecurity with the Medi-Cal program. They say undocumented people should not be covered.
And what's ironic about this is that today is tax day, the worst day of the year, the day when the federal government demands their 35% VIG of your annual income, which is equivalent to theft. Let's be honest. That's what it is, theft. Then depending which state you live in, your state government demands their piece as well, like in California, where Gavin Newsom requires you cough up another 15% of your income, going to him, collected today. Also, we can continue funding free health care for illegals. The same state that ran a $46 billion budget deficit last year, meaning they spent $46 billion more than they earned. Florida, though, has zero state income tax and manages to run a balanced budget, yet California, highest state income tax in the country with a $46 billion deficit. Explain that. Yesterday, President Trump being interviewed and no longer hinting at eliminating federal income taxes. Now he's outright saying it is a real possibility. Watch.
Los aranceles van a reemplazar el income tax.
You know, you're the only one that's asked me that. Oh, I deal with all these big financial geniuses. Nobody ever. There is a chance that the money from tariffs could be so great that it would replace. You know, in the old days, about 1870 to 1913, the tariffs were the only form of money. And that's when our nation was relatively the richest. We were the richest.
Something I believe Trump will run on in the midterms. No tax for the middle class. Middle class, no tax. Best political slogan of all time. In another story, a new study has uncovered over $100 million in foreign dark money being laundered into the U.S. political system via the 1630 Fund, a group that's been pushing these far-left projects since 2008. Recently, they've turned their attention, though, toward ballot initiatives, realizing the way our current system's set up with the legislative system, most of the policies and projects that they push won't actually stand up in court. So they've realized the only way to get this type of change is to put these policies directly on the ballot. This group, 1630 Fund, has been directly responsible for all these ballot initiatives that we're seeing in like 25 different states. They've put forward direct ballot initiatives, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Roll the tape.
2024 report. What kinds of state initiatives were they trying to influence? What's the topic?
So it's one thing to know that this is not a hypothetical situation. We have been able to trace that, over $100 million of foreign money has flown through the 1630 Fund in these states across the country, and they are working to implement some far left and extremist public policies on issues related to abortion, election law, and other things across the country. Drug policy. They are trying to sidestep the legislative process and get the most extreme version of public policy possible.
But why would they want that, Caitlin?
Well, because they know that their far left agenda often cannot withstand the scrutiny of a typical legislative process. So they are sidestepping the legislative process, and they are getting these extreme public policy measures on the ballot, and they're using foreign dark money to do it.
So
it's a terrible problem.
Let me read this. This is a statement from the 1630 Fund to Fox. It says 1630 Fund is proud to support ballot initiative campaigns that are working to advance economic opportunity, reproductive rights, and democracy. Our donations to these initiatives are made in compliance with local, state, and federal laws. I'm assuming if these bans go into effect in other states, that would end. I'm just still trying to get to the nut of the problem here, which is, so they support a far left agenda, but what kind of things are they looking for? They want to support like reproductive rights. I'm assuming that is for more abortion access. But when it comes to, they say they want to support democracy. What would that be?
Well, when the left says the word democracy, that's their catch-all for, we're trying to do good things. But when you take a look under the hood, you realize that it's an extremist agenda. We saw that foreign-backed funds came into Ohio last year that would have forced the state to gerrymander their congressional districts and change the way that the state conducted elections. There is nothing democratic about using foreign dark money in these state ballot issue campaigns. And states have, woken up, to this problem and realized that their state constitutions and policies are vulnerable to the corruption that is foreign money. And that's why we have seen such momentum across the country passing these bans prohibiting foreign funds from being used in these ballot issue campaigns.
They've become notorious for their dark money status, this specific group, raising enormous sums. In 2020 alone, they raised $410 million to back Democratic candidates and oppose Republicans, but nobody knows where exactly this money's coming from, which overseas parties, and even left-wing outlets like Politico and The Atlantic are critics of them, both writing about the group's role in funneling untraceable funds to these huge super PACs, tying the money to major donors like George Soros, but a lot of the money coming from overseas. This is something the Republicans should fix, really tackle while they're in power: foreign election interference. In another story, President Trump freezing $2.2 billion today in grants and other federal funding to Harvard University after the school rejected the administration's demand to eliminate toxic DEI programs. Harvard's president, Alan Garber, responding, saying, "No government, regardless of which party's in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. Then don't expect to receive billions in federal funding." Trump posting on Truth Social this morning, "Perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity then, if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terror-inspired supporting sickness. Remember, tax-exempt status is totally contingent on acting in the public interest. Good riddance." And by the way, how does it make sense that the federal government gives our money, our tax dollars, to some of the richest institutions on the planet? Harvard has a $53 billion endowment. Why do they need our money? Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Should federal tax dollars continue going to these schools? In another story, Democrat Laura Friedman from California, speaking yesterday at a town hall to her uber left-wing district. Congresswoman Friedman represents California's 30th congressional district, which includes Hollywood, Burbank, Pasadena, rich liberals who were pressing her during the town hall on what action she's taking to fight back against President Trump. Well, get this, in the heat of the moment, she let something slip, saying the quiet part out loud, admitting that 70 House Democrats and their shadow government meet weekly to block President Trump's agenda, using lawfare, she says, and other means, meeting behind the scenes, and that most of what they do, the public never learns about. You can't make this up. Watch.
Every single week, we have a litigation working group where a large group of us, and I'm talking there's maybe 75 members of the House, sit down every single week with the AGs to talk about legal strategy. This is all going on every single week behind the scenes. It is nonstop talk, nonstop introduction of bills and legislation, nonstop being on social media as much as we can without being throttled and without the, crazy analytics, and doing all these things.
Yeah, that's not something you're supposed to admit publicly, Laura. In another story, Trump getting ready to announce the major discovery Doge made last week that apparently will cause huge upheaval in Washington. Congressman Tim Burchett, who sits on the Doge task force, said this week that he expects there will be mass resignations in Congress when this story finally breaks. Elon telling Burchett that he has the paper trail, and a lot of the fraud leads right back to Congress. Elon posting on X last week to Chuck Schumer, the highest ranking Democrat in the Senate minority leader, saying, "Chuck, I'm starting to think you're getting a piece of the action with this government fraud." But no, that couldn't be the case, could it? Look, we're still waiting to learn what exactly it is that Doge found, but what we're hearing it's supposed to be big, and it has to do with current and former politicians. We'll see what happens here, but look, we're still waiting on a number of other priorities as well. There was big talk on a number of topics that we've seen no action on yet, like these Epstein files. Where is the Epstein files? Where is Kash Patel and Pam Bondi on that? A lot of big talk. Kash made big promises before being confirmed, but we've seen very little disclosed as of yet. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.